What is up, my AP students? Hope everybody is doing well and having a great week. Happy Friday. Even though I'm not in school today, you're all already aware of that. I'm going down for my brother's wedding, so I'm gonna have a good time, and I'll let you know how it was. Anyways, I'm recording this on Saturday afternoon. It's about 2:30 here in my apartment in Stanford. So if you don't think I care about the AP class or you're doing well on the exam, this is what I do on my weekends. I talk to my history nerds about being history nerds, which is always fun for me. So entertaining. Anyways, I'm just going to talk for maybe about 10 or 15 minutes or so about some major concepts that you definitely have to have down for Unit 4 here as we're moving through and setting up for the Civil War in Unit 5. We're about halfway through the unit and everything, and after I'm done talking, you guys are going to watch some crash course videos to help and answer some multiple choice questions and maybe a short answer question. I haven't decided yet. I'll figure that out like during the week next week, so future Mr. Williams problem, not current Mr. Williams problem. Anywho, let's get started. So we've been talking about two major things for the last week or so. We've been talking about the market revolution, which is obviously the introduction of capitalism into the United States. We see that as a product of the War of 1812 and the United States not establishing itself as a powerful trade nation. Remember Thomas Jefferson's vision of America, that everybody is a reliable agrarian that is going to simply be a subsistence farmer and make stuff for themselves. We realize that's not a very strong way to run the economy, so we need to improve with trade. America becomes a large manufacturing country during that time period, and we made posters and stuff that really went through the market revolution and took notes. However, the ideas of it are going to be really important into what we're talking about today, which is really reform movements. You're going to see the early abolition movement, the effort to get rid of slavery, as well as the women's rights movement happen in this time period as well. So that it all does connect, but just to give you a little refresher. The other major topic we talked about was Andrew Jackson and the rise of democracy. For a very long period of time, essentially all of U.S. history up until this point when Jackson takes over as president, an incredibly small portion of the population could vote. Obviously, our stereotypical white landowning males. However, suffrage is eventually given to all white males in the country, raising the amount of people that can vote. Now, I do not need to continue to say that this is a terrible thing and everybody should have the right to vote regardless of their race, religion, gender, whatever. But we will get there, and trust me, we do get to universal suffrage eventually. Everybody gets the right to vote. But for the time being, the fact that you have a larger portion of the population, specifically the middle class America that developed during the market revolution, now has a much bigger say in their government, which is a big part of Jackson, even though we're going to have a debate on whether or not we think he was a good person or a good president or necessary or whatever. Obviously did some terrible things as a person and as president. But it can't be ignored that his presidency is absolutely critical for the foundation of the country, right? So we take these two things together. Right, the ideas of essentially just a forwarded Enlightenment era, right, of rationalism, where people can make decisions for themselves, right, and we combine that with newfound economic freedom, and we get a whole bunch of different social movements that are going to come out of this, and that we're going to get into here in a minute, right? But when you think about it, and I'm going to post this on Classroom, it's the same arrow connections that we do on the board, right? You can go all the way back to the mid 1700s, our Unit 2 for us. Right, Unit 3 for us. And we talk about the Enlightenment and rationalism, right, that inspires people. That then connects to the American Revolution, right, which we've talked about, which then connects to the War of 1812 and the economic issues, right, which then continues into the market revolution, right, which then gives us the chain reaction to what we're going to be talking about today. The Second Great Awakening, the rise of morals and ethics in the country, taking over as an important feature, and the rise of different groups. So we'll start with the Second Great Awakening. We already learned about the First Great Awakening. They need to come up with better names, I know. But yeah, remember, Great Awakening, people getting back into the religious mindset of the country. With the newfound wage working and people having to go to factories for work, less people are going to church again. Same thing that happened right after the Enlightenment. Less people were going to church because they believed in deism. They didn't think that God was actually interacting with their daily life. So we see a decline in church attendance again in the early 1800s. Which then gets spiked back up because of people essentially freaking out that their employers have become a much bigger part in their life because they're so dependent on them for salaries. This is an incredibly important thing just because of the mindset of people. When Americans seem to freak out, they turn back to religion in the early 1800s. So, yeah, we have a big rise of religious fervor in the country, which leads to the creation of actually a new religion in the United States that you're probably familiar with, Mormonism. Joseph Smith was an American Christian who had a revelation that Jesus had come to the New World and influenced the Native Americans. And this is all a product of people responding to, again, the market revolution becoming a much bigger controller of their life. Freaking out that, God is no longer that important piece, and questioning, religion that was already in place. Why are we going to go back to a religion that we've, steered away from, gone away from? Let's create our own one. So Mormonism develops. The Mormons start out in the New England Midwestern area and eventually move out to the Utah area, where they try to form their own country called Deserta. We'll talk about that at some point. But yeah, it ends up not working out. But that's why we have such a large population of Mormons in Utah today. They were looking to establish their own country in the western part of the country, like which we talked about. When Americans felt like they were trapped by either the market revolution system or life wasn't going so hot for them back east, they would move west. Same thing with the Mormons. They found themselves persecuted throughout the United States because they're questioning original Catholic and Christian teachings. So they leave. They go out west. They're frontiersmen now, right? Same sort of idea with our other people expanding west when they feel like their lives are stagnant on the East Coast, or with the market revolution and people buying up land and factories taking that land. There's not a lot of room to restart as a farmer, so you got to move out west, right? So just one example from the Second Great Awakening is the Mormons coming out, and again the increase of church attendance again in the United States. Our largest group that develops out of this are actually the Baptists. The Baptist Church is a mostly southern religious section of Christianity. And the reason why baptism becomes so popular is as we slowly start to emancipate slaves, both in the North and the South, and eventually after the Civil War, a large majority of the black population becomes Baptists during the Second Great Awakening. So we do see that as the largest section of Baptists in the country. Many freed slaves and actually people in slavery at the time converted to baptism as their religion. So we see the rise of that as well. We also see the rise of another group of people that you'll probably learn about in your English class this year, the Transcendentalists. Transcendentalism is, again, a reaction to the Second Great Awakening and the market revolution. Essentially, these people thought that society was getting too far. It was becoming too rigid. They were no longer free. Jefferson's idea of being able to just be your own person on a farm is no longer a thing. So the Transcendentalists really relate with nature. Our boys Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Walt Whitman become writers that are incredibly influential in the time period of getting Americans back to what they would consider a more simple America. One that was, again, controlled by just subsistence farming and essentially being one with nature and allowing God to dictate your life. So just a little quote from the Transcendentalists I want to throw out there. While society and its institutions have corrupted the purity of the individual, people are the best when they are truly self-reliant and independent. Sounds a lot like Jefferson. It does sound a lot like Jefferson. But yeah, they do sort of agree with that early mindset of him that Americans, to be truly free, need to be not reliant on business owners, right, for their salary and such. Obviously, we go that way. We'll talk about labor unions and stuff. America becomes the largest producer of everything until, post-World War II, America starts to get rid of manufacturing to where today we're like a service economy. We don't really make stuff anymore. Check anything it's made in Taiwan or China or Vietnam. We used to make stuff. We were a manufacturing economy during the market revolution and up through World War II, but slowly but surely dissipated away from that. So also in the Second Great Awakening, we get a rise of morals and ethics. Obviously, as people are getting closer to God, they get closer to the religious elements, the Ten Commandments, being a good person, all those things. So because of that, because of the rise of morals and ethics, we also have a rise in social reform movements. These social reform movements you've definitely heard of before: abolition, the idea of getting rid of slavery. We see the North actually outlaws and abolishes slavery during this time period throughout the entire North. We also see a guy named John Brown. John Brown was a massive abolitionist who tried to start a big slave uprising in Harper's Ferry, Virginia, as we're going to talk about. And in Harper's Ferry, he essentially tries to take over the town, free the slaves there, and have them start an uprising. And then they were going to march south through Virginia, Maryland, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and free slaves along the way and have them essentially join this giant riot. That was his plan. It didn't come to fruition. It didn't work. But John Brown becomes a symbol for abolition. He becomes what is known as a martyr. If you don't know what a martyr is, it's somebody who dies for their cause and then becomes famous afterwards for it. There's tons of examples that I don't want to get into now because I'm trying to keep my, Unit 4 AP mind in head and not give you other examples. But yeah, martyrs are people that die for their causes, right? So John Brown becomes this symbol for Americans. There's songs and poems written about him, and it becomes a real rallying cry for the abolitionist movement. Another just real quick clarification with abolition really quick. Even the abolitionists, at least a lot of them, they didn't think slavery was good, but they still didn't think black people and white people should be equal. That is like a big part that you have to get out of this. They think that the practice of slavery is immoral, it's unethical, it goes against the teachings of Jesus and God and the Christian religion. But they still do not believe that black and whites need full equality. That is an incredibly small percentage of the abolitionists. You can look at a Pennsylvania senator by the name of Thaddeus Stevens, who really does believe in that. If you see the movie Lincoln, he's a big character in that. But yeah, so there's a very small percentage of abolitionists that actually believe that black and whites should have equality, but a large percentage believe that slavery is a terrible practice and needs to be eliminated. Even other people that you really associate with abolition, like Abraham Lincoln, for example, originally thought, and as many people did, that slavery would slowly die out on its own. Eventually, because of capitalism, the market controls everything. So slavery eventually will no longer be profitable and slowly but surely will go away. That combined with moral and ethical things. So their original ideas were just to stop the spread of slavery, containing slavery where it is. In my CP US history class, we're talking about the containment of communism right now in the Truman Doctrine. So this will come back about 100 years later. The idea of smoldering something where it is so it can't spread. It was really the purpose. And we go through the different compromises, like the Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, the Compromise of 1820, that all have that idea in tow. Basically, the Northerners do not want slavery to spread, so any new states that come into the country, they fight really hard to not let them be slave states or have the ability to determine, their own slave status, if they're going to be a free or slave state. I'm blanking on the term right now, but popular sovereignty. Sorry, half a second pause there. But the idea that states, when they come into the Union, like Kansas and Nebraska, as we're going to see, they're called bleeding Kansas. There's fighting, legit, small skirmishes occurring to determine if you're going to be a slave or a free state. Hundreds and thousands of people moving into those states to be able to cast their vote to see if they were going to be a slave state or free state or not, between the abolitionists and Northerners and the Southerners who obviously want to keep slavery. So yeah, abolition definitely comes out of that. And John Brown, Harper's Ferry, really important. Popular sovereignty, bleeding Kansas. These are all terms that will definitely be asked about and used as evidence. The other thing I want to talk about, and it's the last thing I'll talk about as I'm getting on to 13 minutes here, I really wanted to keep it to 15, is the feminist movement. The women's suffrage movement. And you're going to see eventually they get tied to this thing called the temperance movement, which tries to outlaw alcohol and is successful with prohibition in the 1900s, but we'll get there eventually. Because of the same token with abolition, the rise in morals and the rise in, the transcendentalists and the rise in, treating people equally and giving more people the right to vote under Andrew Jackson, women essentially asked for the same thing. We want equal treatment as well. We want equal rights. When you wrote the Constitution and you wrote the Declaration of Independence, you promised this, that we, the people, that, everybody's endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. We're not asking for anything special. We're just asking for the treatment you promised us in the document. It's the same argument Dr. King takes, by the way, in the 1960s. We're not looking for special treatment. We're just looking to be treated the same as you, which it's hard to argue with that. It's a really strong argument, right? But anyways, we see the rise of the feminist movement. The one that gets really hit on the AP exam is Seneca Falls, the Seneca Falls Convention, 1848 off the top of my head. You can check the Google machine for that, but if I'm right or wrong, I'll correct myself or gloat that I just knew that off the top of my head. Shout out Trivia Champion. Seneca Falls writes what is known as the Declaration of Sentiments. It's really the first group of women getting together. They're very closely tied with the time of abolitionists. They worked together, essentially, the feminists and the abolitionists, because they're both really looking for similar things. Eventually, they break apart, and the feminists are kind of left on their own. Obviously, the Civil War amendments get passed right after the Civil War, which gives black men the right to vote, but still not women for another 60 years until 1920. So a long way to go. But basically, when the abolitionists got what they want, they abandoned the women. Anyways, at the Seneca Falls Convention, they wrote the Declaration of Sentiments, which, if you read it, and we're gonna read it, is essentially just restating the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and adding women in it. That's really all it is. The entire document just adds men and women to honor that. But they definitely rise as well, and then we focus on women like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony in that movement moving forward throughout the 1800s. So yeah, a lot going on. I am going to, post the AP pacing that I've posted before, the course framework. When we did the Market Revolution posters, you guys essentially had to check off, what was AP looking for here. Just going through it really simply, it says to talk about moral and social reforms. We talked about those. The inspired utopia, the idea of a utopian society comes out now too, that you can have a perfect society that's being run. Other religious movements as well, like Mormonism, temperance, the idea of not drinking and not consuming alcohol. We talked about that to improve society. Abolitionists and anti-slavery, we checked that box. Anti-slavery movement in the North, we talked about John Brown, and then Seneca Falls, which is specifically spelt out in here. For the most part, we've gone through everything we need to in this little section here with the Second Great Awakening and whatnot. Remember how everything connects. Remember how everything's arrows. If that's the way you need to think, that's the way you need to think. I told you that that's how my brain works. And when we made those Market Revolution posters, I was really trying to get you to get to that. So if you do eventually get a question about, basically anything, but we'll just take the Market Revolution here really simply. You start with the prompt, whatever it's asking, the Market Revolution. You go to the bottom and you draw out whatever you're really trying to argue, and then just draw the arrows. How are you going to get from the prompt to what you really want to do? Hit every single one of those along the way in your essay, and you really can't miss. So that's all I got. I know I went 2 minutes longer than I wanted to. I hope everybody had a really, really great week. I'll tell you about the wedding next time I see you. And, if anybody needs anything, I'm one email away. So I'll catch you later. Have a good time. Be good with the sub. Do whatever I asked and post on Classroom. I'm sure you will. And I'll talk to you next week. Later days.